Hello, and welcome to the Route 50 Pulse Check, a new interview series focused on highlighting how mayors, governors, and county executives are stepping up to address some of the most pressing issues of the day. My name is Alicia Powell-Gillis, and I'm the senior editor at Route 50. Joining me for this edition of Pulse Check is Charlotte, North Carolina Mayor Vi Lyles. Mayor Lyles, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you, Haley, for having me. It's always great to be able to share information about our city here.
Excellent. Let's get started. So just give me a sense of where Charlotte is today as it pertains to COVID-19 and how the city's response has been going.
Wow, that's a big question. You know, this pandemic has just been something that I think no one expected. And if we did, once it happened, we thought, well, it's either going to mean a new normal or we're going to get back to where we are. And we've learned over the months, it is a new normal. We were the first city in the state to go under a stay-at-home order. The governor now has taken, with his Department of Health and Human Services, a more active role. So our job is to determine the policies that we want to present to the governor. There are some things that we wanted to do. For example, we wanted to start masks early, and we talked to the governor's office. We are continuously trying to represent our citizens well. I think the biggest thing about COVID for us has been how to deal with the closings of our hospitality and tourism industry. 1 in 9 people in our city works in that industry. And as you can imagine, they've been pretty much decimated by the closings because of the contagious nature of this virus. And so we have coped by using 50% of the CARES money that we receive from the federal government to provide grants, not loans, but grants to our small businesses, from the barber shop to our restaurants. And now we're beginning to work with our hotels and our music venues. People are barely holding on, and we're trying to help them hold on just long enough until there's a vaccine. It can be discouraging some days to hear the federal government and how they talk about, we're going to have this and we're going to have that. And I think all of us in this community have a sense of skepticism about the ability to deliver this change. So we're in this for the long haul, and we're consciously dealing with our businesses, our school system, just to make sure that we keep people well and healthy. It's been a tough time. I never thought as a mayor that I'd be dealing with a pandemic.
So that I want to kind of touch on the point that you just raised about skepticism, especially as, we're heading to fall. We've been through this for 6 months. We see COVID fatigue everywhere. Just how are you trying to keep the pressure on and keep your residents understanding the seriousness of this nature and why we still need to be doing what it is that we're doing?
This may be kind of like the government policy geek talk, but we have a policy committee made up of, we're a city within a county. So the city and the county. We also have the hospital systems in our city working together along with our emergency management people. They talk every morning about what we need to do to make sure that people understand the status of our COVID environment. But more importantly, what we do is we try to lead by example. The idea that the city council is now meeting in person with mask and temperature checks, we try to say, we have the confidence that we think we can do this if you maintain the regulations. It'll be interesting because this week will be our first NFL game that will allow people in the stadium. And it's a very well thought out plan. The Carolina Panther Tepper Sports has worked with an epidemiologist. They've worked with us. They've worked with our governor's office. So those kinds of things, what we try to do is be really razor focused on the planning, and the planning is for health and welfare. And so that's how we're doing it. The skepticism, we try not to go too far and say, okay, everything is reopening. What we try to do is support people that are trying to stay open.
So just on that, given that you just said, the NFL's having its first game, now you're kind of getting ready to hold a big major event. What is that how do you think that will help position you for maybe other industries, as you alluded to, that have been hit hard, the music industry, maybe the tourism industry? How do you think this could serve as maybe a model for them to find a way to adapt to COVID longer term?
I think our NFL team came at the end. We've been trying to help our hospitality industry, and we've done a number of things that other communities have done, other cities. For example, if we were allowing 50% indoor dining, we said we're closing the street. We actually have closed streets so that restaurants can set up tables on the sidewalks as well as on the streets. I think another example of this is that we have gone to try to decrease the drive time for our public transit. We're opening more bus-only lanes. And in some ways, it's been, how do we promote even within our own organization? We have 8,000 employees in our city. And when we think about those employees, we've tried to make it possible for them to work virtually and to adjust to that. And we've also supported other levels of government. We donated $1 billion money to them because they not have we know there's a primary neighborhoods without internet hotspots to do that differently. It's pointed out the disparities in health and the digital divide. It's pointed out the things that we perhaps do that really we said, why? Why do we have to have all of these lanes of traffic when people need that real estate to make a living? And we've adjusted.
So you mentioned the word disparity. So let's talk a little bit more about that. Obviously, COVID has highlighted disparities that were pre-existing before this condition, before the virus. And obviously, this summer after the George Floyd murder, Breonna Taylor, we have been in a summer of racial reckoning in this country. So I want to kind of get a sense from you as you deal with, and your city is no stranger to this either, as you deal with the idea of racial healing. What does that mean to you, and how do you envision that playing out in Charlotte?
Well, that's a big question, Haley. I always tell the story so that people understand. And this is one of those conversations that I have with more people that are white than that are black. You have to go in. Charlotte has many, many successful businesses and companies. And what I've gone to them and said, I would need you to understand what systemic racism means. Oftentimes people deny it. It's like, well, the last 10 years, we've had a lot of progress. But we have to understand that 400 years of slavery and then the acts that were taken by governmental policy, redlining, the lack of access to capital, the denial of a really strong public education system, you can't deny those impacts upon the Black community. And we've been working very hard to recognize it first, because I think that one of the rabbis in my city told me that first you have to understand it if you're going to atone for it. And that's what we have to do. People, when you move here, we're the 15th largest city in the country right now. We have a lot of people coming into the city, and they're not necessarily from the Southern culture. We need to recognize our role in making sure that we begin to understand the actual impact of those actions by the government deny wealth and education in the Black community. So what are we doing? We have identified opportunity corridors, which are not opportunity zones, but we're looking at our primary African-American corridors, and we're making infrastructure investments as well as working with the private sector to help us build back the foundation of entrepreneurship. And that's a specific, visible effort that I think that we're trying to make to the communities that feel, and they don't feel, they know that we haven't invested in them for a long time. The difficult thing that I think that I have to explain to people is everybody doesn't want a shiny tower. We've got that in our center city, but they do want the ability to be entrepreneurs. They do want the ability to go to a grocery store or a bank in their community. And that's how we're trying to address it. That's one of the methods we're using.
So you talked about how you're working towards a way to build generational wealth for the Black community. Also, you mentioned redlining, and affordable housing, quality affordable housing has obviously been a significant issue prior to the pandemic, during the pandemic, and after the pandemic. And so I'm also curious, given that you are a growing city, how are you kind of going to work on the other end of the spectrum and work to maybe find a longer term solutions, if you will, to the affordable housing crisis?
So, like many mayors in the city, you have to deal with what happens today, but you have to be planning for tomorrow. Um, I am very fortunate that this community understands the value of housing for everyone that works in the city. We don't want to be so segregated that we have to have a private bus system to bring workers into the city. I mean, we've seen that, and we want to avoid that. So a year ago, we had a $50 million bond referendum that the community passed 69%. Then I went to the private sector and said, you need to match this money. So we had $100 million, and we, over the course of several years, will have 8,000 new units. But we're now talking about how you do development. And as people come in and talk about, we want to redevelop it, we have two strategies. One, if you want us to rezone your property, what are you going to do for affordable housing if you're going to develop a residential community? But the other larger one is that we are continuing to focus on our transit system. And if you go along our transit system, I often say rents are high, but owning a car is a burden to a household. So we are looking at affordable housing along our transit and rail lines to determine how can we do this. I can't be more proud. Today we had a bank announce that they were going to put in $4 million working with Habitat for Humanity. I can't tell you how the community has responded to this. We are making a difference in affordable housing, but it's slow. And sometimes it's hard for people to understand. But if you keep your eye on the future, as mayors have to do, as city councils have to do, we have to explain, yes, we know you can't see it immediately, but it is coming, and we have to remind people. So we have another $50 million on our referendum on November the 3rd, and I'm hoping that we get to 70% approval as a result of the changes we're making.
So I love the comment you just made about keeping your eye, planning for tomorrow, keeping your eye also towards the future, even while dealing with today, which, especially given the multiple crises of these years, it can be very difficult to just think beyond tomorrow.
Yes.
But in Charlotte, you all have worked on a 2040 comprehensive plan. So I'm curious to hear more about that, how you hope that will transform your city for the better long term and help you move beyond the, for lack of a better word, trauma of the past year.
Well, I tell you, a 2040 land use plan can be pretty traumatizing to a lot of people. People move here and they think, oh, this is a beautiful, livable city. But I remind myself and others that are in the jobs that I have or we have to work together, is it only remains livable if you have a plan to make it so. And that's what our comprehensive plan is about. It is actually about making sure that we don't lose what we are known for, which is livability and diversity. So one of the examples, and this is something that we borrow from other communities, the idea that we are willing to have rezoning for housing that will allow for more than single family residential. You know, everybody doesn't want to live on a third of a lot of an acre and have a big home. So how do we make sure that we're building duplexes and triplexes and quadruplexes? One of our business plan and laying the foundation for affordability and workforce development, we're going to be able to accomplish that kind of change. So that's one example. Another example is incorporating early on where we're going to what we call mobility. Now, most people think of transportation as highways and roads and streets. We have a plan underway now called the Charlotte Mobility Plan that focuses on pedestrian trails across our city, that focuses on our bike lanes, focuses on our bus system, our rail system, as well as roads for our cars. We know that cars are going to be with us, but we also think people need to have choices. And the committee that, it's a citizens committee chaired by one of our really former great mayors, Harvey Gantt, and they set a standard to say everyone in the city should be only 10 minutes away from the ability to be mobile. And setting that standard makes a real difference, because what we're talking about is not we're going to build you a sidewalk or a road. What we're talking about is we're going to build you the ability to move around our city.
So obviously this has been a year that has been a true test of leadership. So I'm just curious to hear from you. How has the events of this year maybe altered or reinforced your idea of what it means to be a leader?
Wow, that's a question sometimes I ponder for myself. It is very tough to try to give in for the day as well as the future. I think that's been my biggest challenge. When the pandemic, it wasn't really announced, but in March, I remember March 9th very vividly, because I was walking down the hall and I was talking with one of my assistants, and I said, we're going to lose our mobility plan. This is going to make us all stop. But then you have to shake that sense of, like loss off and say, how do we do both? How do we make sure we take care of people and we continue our mobility planning? And I think that what it means is that you have to consciously listen more. And that's hard for some people. It's hard for me. But my commitment is to try to listen more, bring more people into the discussion, to always be transparent and truthful. That's how I have found the challenge of leadership to be. I've learned that you can't do anything by yourself. When we talk about it takes a village, I'm beginning to think it takes courage of many, many people, much more than a village. This idea of working with the governor's office often on a regular basis, the idea that you have to talk with your federal delegation to make sure that they understand your state legislature. So it's a big, big tent, and we're trying very hard to listen and explain why Charlotte, which represents a large part of our state's economic growth, should be heard in these halls of policy making and law making, I guess, and legislating.
So just to end, I know it's, again, reiterate that how difficult of a year it is, but but there's probably a silver lining somewhere in this. And I'm just curious to hear for you, what are you optimistic to see in the future in Charlotte?
I'm optimistic that we have plans underway, but we also have from the community the ability to finance those plans. The idea of taxing people during a pandemic is something that I wrestle with. It's like we have to keep our taxes a low to be affordable, but at the same time, we have to have the confidence that when we ask people for us to do something really significantly different, that they believe that we've been good fiscal stewards of their money, so that when we get to the plan that's over and it's time to implement, that they say that we have operated wisely and we've been fiscally responsible. I think the silver lining will be that our community will understand each other better and will understand the need to help each other be successful and succeed in this time.
Well, what a wonderful note to end on. Mayor Lyles, I cannot thank you enough for joining me. This was a fabulous discussion, and I look forward to seeing all the good work you continue to do in Charlotte.
Thank you so much, Haley, for having me.
And now a word from our underwriters.
Hi, I'm Ann Duncan. I'm a Chief Strategy and Innovation Officer at Dell Technologies, and I'm part of a team of Chief Strategy and Innovation Officers. And our role is to help state and local government CIOs be more effective. We help them by delivering the Dell value proposition from the edge to the core to the cloud. Today, Rob Silverberg, who's responsible for our Digital Cities Initiative, is going to tell us a little more about that.
Thank you, Ann. And hi, everyone. Rob Silverberg. I lead the Dell Technologies focus for digital cities for North America. I've been focused on our smart city strategy for the last 5 years. And what I've seen is that there's been a great evolution over the last few years in terms of what was experiments with technology several years ago are now producing real actionable results for our city customers. These sort of results that we're seeing are improvements in transportation, improvements in public safety, the ability to become a more data-driven city, and leveraging new data sources from connected devices, as well as data sources from across the city organization for actionable intelligence. So the real outcomes that we're working on and hoping to work on with our city customers going forward are producing real manageable results from our smart city initiatives.